Okay, anyway, let's get started. We left off in the middle of chapter 2. We're on 1 Kings chapter 2, and we will start with verse 28. Just to remind us what has happened until now. We had the rebellion of Adoniah, which at that point he recognizes Adoniah, recognizes Solomon's the king, and Solomon pardons him. But then he tries another trick, Adoniah, and he, wants to have this Avishag become his wife, and Bathsheba doesn't realize that this is really a rather sinister request. But when Solomon hears about it, he said, "That's it. I see that he's still up to his ways, and he hasn't really accepted me as king, and therefore he has him killed." And then at that point recognizes that the original threesome, Adoniah, Aviatar, and Yoav, are still a problem. So we saw he killed Adoniah. When it comes to Aviatar, he doesn't kill him. He says because he was so loyal to his father David. He also probably realizes that on his own, he's not as much of a threat. He's more of a priest and less a military or a political figure, but he banishes him from Jerusalem. And now we're on the third, on Yoav. So let's see what happens here. When the news reached Yoav, he fled to the tent of the Lord and grasped the horns of the altar. For Yoav had sided with Adoniah, though he had not sided with Absalom. So we know this, that Yoav had been with Adoniah, and we see he uses the same technique that Adoniah used initially when he goes and holds on to the horns of the altar as a place of safe refuge. And his assumption is that that will protect him from being killed. And what happened initially with Adoniah was that on the one hand, Solomon said, that's not going to protect him. But on the other hand, when Adoniah made it clear that he was, accepting Solomon's kingdom, then Solomon pardoned him. He should have learned from that maybe he misunderstood. Maybe he thought that the reason Adoniah was let to live was because he had grasped the altars of the horns of the altar. So he tries that again, but it clearly doesn't work. Okay, King Solomon was told that Yoav had fled to the tent of the Lord, that he was there by the altar. So Solomon sent Benaiah, son of Yoiada, saying, "Go and strike him down." Benaiah went to the tent of the Lord and said to him, "Thus said the king, come out." "No," he replied, "I will die here." Benaiah, and so this puts Benaiah in a very bad position. What, are you supposed to kill this guy on the altar? It doesn't make sense. But of course, Yoav is taking advantage of this to prevent himself from being killed, even though he really deserves to die. Benaiah reported back to the king that Yoav had answered thus and thus. And the king said, "Do just as he said, strike him down and bury him, and remove guilt from me and my father's house for the blood of the innocent that Yoav has shed." So first of all, Solomon, in really asserting in a very important act of kingship here and authority, he's basically saying there are no safe havens here. If you deserve to die, you're going to die. Don't use this technical, I'm holding on to the altar, which of course would end up being an opening for anarchy. Every murderer, rapist, thief would just get away with no punishment. All he needed to do was run to the altar and hold on to the altar. So of course, Solomon must really put an end to this whole thing. But it's very interesting here because what he's saying, what is his reasoning for him killing him? Until this point, our assumption is he wants to kill him because he realizes that he, together with Aviatar and Adoniah, are still trying to rebel against him. But we see here now that that's not the reason. He says, "Remove guilt from me and my father's house for the blood of the innocent that Yoav has shed." And this really takes us back to the last will and testament of David. So if you go back to chapter 2, this is chapter 2, verse 5. This is David's instruction to Solomon. "Further, you know what Yoav, son of Tsuriah, did to me, and what he did to the two commanders of Israel's forces, Abner, son of Ner, and Amasa, son of Yeter. He killed them, shedding blood of war in peacetime, staining the girdle of his loins and the sandals on his feet with blood of war. So act in accordance with your wisdom and see that his white hair does not go down to Sheol, to the grave, in peace. So we said then that David's instruction to Solomon to kill Joab, and he makes it very clear, he wants him gone, he should not live out his life in peace, is not because anything he may have done. I mean, Adoniah's rebellion, the initial rebellion, was not against Solomon, it was against David. It was against David to replace, to become the next king, which of course then affected Solomon, but the actual rebellion against David. So David does not kill him. And these instructions he gives, we talked about it then, there's reasons why he's not going to kill him yet. But even here, he mentions what's the reason to kill Joab. It's because of the two people he killed that was no justification. We discussed it then. He killed people who did not deserve to die. He did it in such a way that was literally stabbing David in the back, because in both cases, David had offered or assured these people safety, and instead that safety was desecrated. So here, he said to Solomon, you will use your wisdom. And another way of saying that would be, you will find the appropriate opportunity. And so here we see that Solomon found the appropriate opportunity. He's in the process of getting rid of those who rebelled, who still have this idea of rebellion. Okay, Adoniah, Aviatar, and Joab. And so it would seem that when he's going to get rid of Joab, it's going to be the same reasons that he got rid of Adoniah and Aviatar. But here he wants it to be very clear. It's not for the same reasons. He's taking advantage of that opportunity. But the real reason is the reason that David had given, that he murdered people that did not deserve to die. Verse 32, thus the Lord will bring his blood guilt down upon his own head because unbeknown to my father, he struck down with a sword of two men more righteous and honorable than he, unknown to my father at that time. Of course, David gave the instruction, he was well aware. But in both cases, he went behind David's back. Abner, son of Ner, the army commander of Israel, and Amasa, son of Yeter, the army commander of Judah. May the guilt for their blood come down upon the head of Joab and his descendants forever. And may good fortune from the Lord be granted forever to David and his descendants, his house and his throne. With this action, he is basically cursing the descendants of Joab, and at the same time blessing the descendants of David, which of course is himself, Solomon. And he's then saying, oh wait, my phone is going and I forgot to put on silent. Hold it 1 second. Sorry about that. I'm just going to put it on silent and then we will no longer be bothered. Okay. So he's essentially blessing himself as a descendant of David. But I think it's not just a yay me, I did this. I don't think that's where he's coming from. I think he's coming from this idea of now he has gotten rid of these last obstacles to a successful reign, and following his father's instructions as well, at least so far. Okay, so Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, went up and struck him down, and he was buried at his home in the wilderness. In his place, the king appointed Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, over the army. And now we have what happened instead of Aviatar, and in place of Aviatar, the king appointed the priest Zadok. I think we mentioned this as well last week, that it is the descendants of Zadok that remain the priests from this time on through into well into the middle or the end of the second temple period. We're not even in the first temple yet. So this is a powerful dynasty, this dynasty of Zadok. And I think I mentioned that the English word Sadducees, in Hebrew it's Stokim, it means the descendants of Zadok. In the second temple period, they were problematic. Right here, they're really not. They're good guys. Okay, 36. Then the king summoned Shimei and said to him, okay, so now we're going back to the rest of David's last will, or his instructions to Solomon. We referred back to it now when he got rid of Joab, but there's also one other person that David asked him to get rid of, instruct him to get rid of, and that is Shimei. And you recall Shimei is the fellow who curses David as he comes down when he's driven from Jerusalem because of Absalom. And when he comes back, Joab actually says, why don't we kill when we kill Shimei? And Shimei says, no, and David says, no, we're not going to kill him right now. And the reason we said that he's not going to kill him now is as he's coming back to retake the throne. The most important thing he can do right now is to unify the nation. And therefore, it's not a time to start killing all the people that sided with Absalom. And so the worst thing you could possibly do at that time is to kill Shimei. But again, like in the case of Joab, he understands that the continued Shimei is a problem. And we'll remember that when Shimei attacked David, he comes in the name of the house of Saul. And so for as long as we have this ideology around that's saying Saul and the house of Saul are the legitimate kings, that will always fly in the face of the legitimacy of the house of David. And so he presents an ongoing political challenge. But remember, again, David says to Solomon, use your wisdom. And we'll see here how he uses his wisdom. Then the king summoned Shimei and said to him, build yourself a house in Jerusalem and stay there. Do not ever go out from there anywhere else. Essentially, he's not killing him, he's putting him under house arrest. On the very day that you go out and cross the Vadi Kidron, you can be sure that you will die. Your blood shall be on your own head. That is fair, said Shimei to the king. Your servant will do just as my lord the king has spoken. And for a long time, Shimei remained in Jerusalem. In other words, Shimei understands that there is an open vendetta here, and that actually what Solomon is offering him is a way to avoid getting killed. He realizes he's living on borrowed time, but he says, okay, that's fair. It's fine because I can live. I just have to stay in Jerusalem. Okay. And it's also very interesting. He doesn't say you have to stay in the house. He's saying you have to stay in Jerusalem. Don't cross the Vadi Kidron, the river Kidron. 3 years later, 2 slaves of Shimei ran away to King Achish, son of Maacah of Gat. Shimei was told, your slaves are in Gat. Shimei thereupon saddled his ass and went to Achish and Gat to claim his slaves, and Shimei returned from Gat with his slaves. This is a reasonable situation. In other words, Shimei has a problem. His slaves have escaped. He's got to go bring them back. How else is he going to do it without leaving Jerusalem? However, he has been warned. If for whatever reason you leave Jerusalem, truth of the matter is 3 years have passed, and that is probably the key here. Probably Shimei is saying, oh, Solomon, he forgot about me already. I don't have to worry about it now. What, I'm going to go hire somebody to go find my slaves? I'm going to have to spend some money. I don't want to spend money. I'm a cheapskate. Okay? And you can see that this is what's going on, but the end result is that he doesn't take Solomon's decree seriously. Solomon was told that Shimei had gone from Jerusalem to Gat and back, and the king summoned Shimei and said to him, did I not adjure you by the Lord and warn you on the very day that you leave and go somewhere else, you can be sure that you will die? And did you not say to me, it is fair, I accept? Why did you not abide by the oath before the Lord and by the orders which I gave you? Here, then, we have not just the order, because in the original discussion, we don't see anything about an oath, or God is not mentioned. Here it is. Okay, so there's two possibilities. Either that it wasn't mentioned initially, but it happened. In other words, it wasn't just the king commanded and Shimei said, I accept. But he says, okay, now I want you to take an oath before God. And it's very possible that that happened. It could also be that the king is saying and this is also very, very interesting in what we see Solomon trying to accomplish here, that because Solomon is an anointed of God, okay, he's an anointed king by God, and therefore, what he is saying is when the king gives you an order, it's as if this order is coming from God. I don't think Solomon would think that about every order that he gave, but I think in this case, he's basically saying obeying the king is a religious principle, not just a political principle. Okay. Be that as it may, the king said further to Shimei, you know all the wrong, which you remember very well that you did to my father David. Okay, he's about to kill him, and he wants to be sure that Shimei understands it's not on a technicality. It's not because he left Jerusalem once to go find his slaves. It is basically, Solomon is twisting this and twisting it, I think, in a correct way. He's basically saying, I let you live by putting this technicality, don't leave Jerusalem, okay? I'm not going to kill you because you left Jerusalem. I'm killing you because of what you did previously. You cursed the king and you're a danger to the house of David. That's why you're being killed. I gave you an opportunity for pardon and you violated that. So now you are no longer protected from what you really deserve because what you did to David. And that's basically what he's saying now. But King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before the Lord forever. Again, we are seeing that what Solomon is doing now, in general, by getting rid of the threats to his kingdom, when that's about Adoniyahu and Eviatar, and in addition, when he fulfills the instructions of David by getting rid of both Shimei and Yoav, what he is doing is strengthening his kingdom. And that's why he says, and the throne of David shall be established for the Lord forever. That is what he is accomplishing. The king gave orders to Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, and he went out and struck Shimei down, and so he died. Thus, the kingdom was secured in Solomon's hands. As if we're saying, okay, we finished the job. We took care of all these loose ends, and now Solomon is indeed a very strong king. He has taken his place in inheriting his father David's seat, but also in the actions that he has done. He has proven himself to be a king who knows how to wield authority with wisdom. Okay, and that takes us to chapter 3, where we are going to see him move forward in his kingship. Okay, now, my English here said Solomon allied himself by marriage with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Now that's actually a bit of a commentary, because the literal translation is Solomon married Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. He married Pharaoh, and he took the daughter of Pharaoh and brought her to and when it says you take a woman, it means married. So it's using basically two different words for married. The first is he married Pharaoh, and the second is he took the daughter of Pharaoh in marriage. What does this mean? The scripture is telling us in a very clear way, this is not a love marriage. It may become a love marriage, we don't know. But it begins by saying he's marrying Pharaoh. He's not marrying the daughter of Pharaoh, he's marrying Pharaoh, which means the entire purpose of this relationship between Solomon and the daughter of Pharaoh is a diplomatic relationship. And it was very acceptable in the ancient world. They did not have ambassadors, and they did not, and sometimes they had treaties, but one of the best ways to solidify an alliance between two kings would be that one would marry the other. Now, I read somewhere that Pharaoh, Egypt, of course, is an ancient empire, has always been very, very strong. And so what normally would have happened would be that Solomon would give his daughter to Pharaoh. In other words, there'd be this idea of the weaker king giving the daughter to the stronger king to cement that alliance. But here we have the opposite. And I don't know if this is true or not. This is what I read somewhere. I thought it was very interesting. And it was a way of saying that Solomon has already made his mark upon the world, upon the ancient world, upon the kingdoms that surround him. And so Pharaoh himself is seeking this relationship with Solomon, which of course puts him on a much higher level than we have seen until now. He married Pharaoh's daughter, brought her to the city of David, until he had finished building his palace and the house of the Lord and the walls around Jerusalem. Okay, now, right now at this point, we don't know anything about Solomon building a palace for himself, a palace, the temple, the house of the Lord, and the wall. And so what this verse is basically saying is that this was his plan, but he hasn't yet done it. So what is the city of David? Where are they living right now? They're living in the palace that David built. So let's go back to 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel, verse 5. Excuse me, chapter 5. 2 Samuel, chapter 5, verse 9. Okay. This chapter is right after the capture, when David captures Jerusalem. And then we have as follows. We'll start from verse 9. David occupied the stronghold and renamed it the city of David. Okay, and the city of David is where the city of David that we know today, below the Temple Mount. That is Jerusalem, okay? David also fortified the surrounding area from the Millo inward. David kept growing stronger, etc. And then we learn in verse 11, King Hiram of Tyre sent envoys to David with cedar logs, carpenters and stonemasons, and they built a palace for David. Thus David knew that the Lord established him, etc. So what is his house? What is Solomon's house, which is in the city of David? It is the original palace that David had built from cedar wood, the cedar wood that he had received from the king of Tyre from Lebanon. Okay, now it says here in our chapter, it says he brought her to the city of David. Again, it's the same city of David we saw before, below the Temple Mount, which will become significant where exactly this is. Okay, now question here on this whole issue of him marrying the daughter of Pharaoh. Is there any criticism here? Do we see a criticism here on the fact that he took the daughter of Pharaoh and married her? What do you think?
It's in the law that they should not go back to Egypt and multiply to themselves horses and wives.
Right, but he didn't go to Egypt. The daughter of Egypt came to him, okay? And he hasn't multiplied wives yet. This is his first wife.
Well, that's nitpicking.
No, I think
it's the start of a slippery slope.
Exactly. Okay, that's a great way of looking at it. Because I think here, when scripture is telling us this story, I don't see or feel a hint of criticism. All right, now let's compare this later on. Of course, we're going to learn this in much greater detail when we get there, please God. But let's look ahead to chapter 11, okay? Chapter 11, verse 1. King Solomon loved many foreign women in addition to Pharaoh's daughter, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Phoenician, and Hittite women from the nations of which the Lord had said to the Israelites, none of you shall join them, and none of them shall join you, lest they turn your heart away to follow their gods. Such Solomon clung to and loved. He had 700 royal wives and 300 concubines, and his wife turned his heart away. Okay? We have here in chapter 11 very clear criticism. They had all these wives, and we know that that is a direct violation of the instruction to a king that is originally in Deuteronomy, that a king should not have, that's what you were referring to, Carol, a king should not have too many wives, and he should not have too many horses, lest he go to Egypt. It seems that Egypt was the horse capital at the time, and so here there's definite criticism. And criticism, they talk about all these foreign women in addition to Pharaoh's daughter. And so you have to wonder if what that verse isn't saying, that Pharaoh's daughter on its own may have been all right, but in addition to Pharaoh's daughter kind of indicates that this began the slippery slope, which ended him there with 1,000 wives. Now, there's no question that the reason he took 1,000 wives was because he was cementing political relationships with 1,000 different kings. No question. Okay. Kings and city-states and duchies and, all kinds of political entities all over the Middle East. But by that time, Scripture already has real criticism against him. But we'll learn that in detail when we get there. Okay, now, one more thing I want to talk about where everything is. Let's look at 2 Samuel chapter 7. All these little references are going to become very relevant. 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 2. This is when David, after he's concluded most of his wars, he turns to Nathan and he asks to build the temple. What does he say? The king said to the prophet Nathan, "Here I am, dwelling in a house of cedar, while the ark of the Lord abides in a tent." Okay, so let's recall that. So here we're going to have the fact that from that we can understand if Solomon is living in that original house of cedar that was David's palace, okay, the tent is going to be not far from him, and that's where the ark is. Now we know from the end of 2 Samuel that actually the tent moves, the ark moves, because he ends up buying. Let's take a look at that. 2 Samuel, the very end of the book. David bought the threshing floor and the oxen 50 shekels of silver, and David built there an altar to the Lord and sacrificed burnt offerings and offerings of well-being. The Lord responded to the plea for the land. The plague against Israel was checked. Okay, so we have a Temple Mount, we have the ark that was probably brought up there, and we have an altar there, okay? Not a temple, just an altar. So all that is background as to where all these people are. City of David is adjacent to the Temple Mount, but below. Okay, it's lower down. Temple Mount's up here. City of David is down here. Now let's continue. Verse 2. The people, however, continued to offer sacrifices at the high places. It says here open shrines. It's the high places, okay? Because up to that time, no house had been built for the name of the Lord. Now, this is a very interesting thing. We will see later on as we go through the book of Kings, there will be, especially towards the end of 1 and 2, when after Solomon's death, all the kings, they will have the kings of Judah, even the righteous ones, most of them there'll be one criticism about them, but they continue to worship or bring sacrifices at the high places. We see this, let's take a look at that. 1 Kings chapter 14. This is where the problem begins, okay? 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 22. Here we're talking about Rehoboam, who is Solomon's son, and it says as follows, 22. Judah did what was displeasing to the Lord and angered him more than their fathers had done by the sins that they committed. They too built for themselves high places, pillars, and sacred posts on every high hill and under leafy tree. There were also, then it goes on, male prostitutes, etc. Here is where we first see this habit or this custom of sacrificing on the high places. All right, so what's wrong with that? Let's go back and understand this. In Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 4, we have a very clear, just before verse 4, we have an instruction to get rid of all the pagan worship places, and it refers to pagan worship places that are in high places, okay? And then in verse 4, it says, do not worship the Lord your God in like manner. In other words, don't worship the Lord your God all over the place in high places, but look only to the site that the Lord your God will choose amidst all your tribes as his habitation to establish his name there. There you are to go. Okay. put this all together. There is no temple yet, okay? When there is a temple, that verse in Deuteronomy will take place, because that section of Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy 12, beginning in Deuteronomy 11, Deuteronomy 12, there's ongoing discussion of the commandment of the children of Israel to build a temple for God once they come into the land and everything's settled. And of course, it takes a long time because initially there's a tabernacle, but it's clear that once David has conquered Jerusalem, Jerusalem becomes Israel's eternal capital. And then this command that God said to the nation of Israel in Deuteronomy, the place that I select to put my name there, that will be the Temple Mount, which was purchased by David at the very end of his life, at the end of Second Samuel. So here, what do we have in verse 2? They continued to offer sacrifices on the high places, because up to that time, no house had been built for the name of the Lord. So we're learning that they're offering sacrifice on high places, but Scripture is telling us it's okay, because they don't yet have that permanent temple, that one place that God has said, when you have that place, all your sacrifice need to go there. Now, the question is, why is it telling us this? Why is it relevant? I understand that later on, when there is a temple, and then under Rehoboam, they start sacrificing in the high places, you could say, oh, that's a sin. But if this is not a sin, why bother mentioning it? And I think what's going on here is that, what are these high places? And with this, we'll conclude today. And I know we didn't do that much in chapter 3 today, but we will continue next week. What is going on here? Okay. Think about this. Once there is a temple, God is saying you cannot offer sacrifices anywhere else. Now, for us, offering sacrifices is something we have a hard time relating to. But in the ancient world, the way you came close to God, other than pray, and people prayed, they didn't pray in public. They didn't have ceremonies of prayers. The public worship was surrounding the sacrifices. But people could pray. But they felt prayer, okay, it's my little whatever. When they really wanted to do something special, get close to God in a special way, engage in some kind of ceremony, it was through sacrifices. So once there was this place in Jerusalem, let's say you lived over in the Golan Heights, you lived down in Beersheba, okay? And you've had this need. You wanted to thank God for something. You want to express a very important connection beyond your, I had a prayer today and I spent 15 minutes praying to God on my own in my house, talking to God. You want something extra, okay? Having to go all the way to Jerusalem to do that is really difficult. And so you can understand that there was this ongoing, I'm not talking about pagan worship. I'm talking about sacrifices to God. You could see why there was this need that people felt, I don't want to wait till I can get to Jerusalem. It's too hard. I've got kids. I've got a job. It's too hard to get there. I don't want to wait 2 months till I have vacation. I want to do it now. So they go to the local high places. The high places could be in their backyard, could be in the city square, okay? So clearly what we're seeing here is that this was something that was already entrenched before the temple is built. And that helps us understand why they go back to it, even after the temple is built. It's something that they have a very hard time getting rid of. So I think this is why it is here. Also, we're going to see that Solomon is going to go and offer a sacrifice on the main high place that is in Gibeon. That's what we're reading in the next verse, which we'll take up next week. But I think there's also a very important message here, important for us to understand this whole dynamic, because what we're starting now with Solomon is, think about this, religion is changing. Okay, he's the one who's going to build the temple. Everything is going to change. And that the scripture is trying to get us in understanding what changes, what's going on here, what is the spiritual life of the nation of Israel life before the temple, while it's being built, and afterwards, all of which is a very important part of Solomon's reign. So that is what we have done today. Any comments or questions? Yes, Claudette.
I have just one comment. We know that the reign of Shlomo was peaceful. maybe all these arrangements that he had with the different nations contributed to that, because it's a diplomatic relationship. You're looking for peace,
100%. I agree with you 100%. And yet we see at the end that it becomes his undoing.
Yes, it was.
So-
He was compromised in all of it.
Right. And
It
that's
was-
the question.
His spiritual
It's not-
life was
right.
compromised. Yeah.
It's not easy to be a king. And a king has to look out for the well-being of his people. And that requires political arrangements, and that involves wars. And political arrangements and wars are messy. We know that today. I mean, the world was no more perfect under Solomon than it is today.
Yeah. He
But
avoided the
The
wars by
question
having
is, how do
these
you find that
relationships.
balance?
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't have the answer, but clearly he tipped the balance and something went wrong.
And the other thing I think about the sacrifice in the high places, I think there's some economics involved with this, because if you have to spend money to go down to Jerusalem, you have to take all your money and give it to the people at the Temple of Jerusalem. It's a business, also a spiritual thing, I think.
Well, I don't know if it's any different price. The only difference in price is the travel, and I don't think they had airplanes and trains
Yeah, but they
then.
had to take the sacrifice. They had to get the animals.
No, but it's the same sacrifice. Let's say you have a sheep and you want to offer the sacrifice. You take your sheep and you can go to the town square and offer the sheep, or you take the sheep to Jerusalem. Okay. Now, what you could also do is not take the sheep to Jerusalem, but you could sell the sheep to your neighbor, take the money.
Take the money.
And when you get to Jerusalem, buy another sheep to sacrifice. So there were ways. So really the only economic disadvantage of going to Jerusalem would be the waste, the time that it would take to get there and back, the travel. You would take your donkey or your whatever, your camel, usually a donkey, and ride down to Jerusalem. And it's a pain in the neck, and it'll take you a week to get there and back, or 2 weeks, depending on where you live. And it's difficult, it's inconvenient. But I don't think it's a major economic issue. It's more convenience than anything else, I
Than
think.
economics.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're
Or
welcome.
you could be
Yes,
like
girl.
Saul, or you could be like, not Saul, Samuel, who did a yearly circuit of several places. I can't remember them all. I think one was Ramah and another one was Mizpah. And he would go round and presumably have a sacrifice there, and the people would come.
Well, what we learn about that yearly thing is also, I don't know how much sacrificing they did. We know he had a few times that he did sacrifices, but he also did it to meet the people and to resolve disputes. That's what we learn about there. But all that is very possible. This is what was going on, whether it was with a Samuel or without a Samuel. But this all has to change once there's a temple, because that's what God said in Deuteronomy. And so this is something we need to appreciate. It's not simple. When we learn later on, as the descendants of Solomon, even the righteous kings will say they were followed in the way of God, but they didn't remove the high places. You see that over and over, unlike the kings of Israel, who were involved in pagan worship. The kings of Judah were not involved in pagan worship for the most part. Their sin would have been that they didn't remove the high places, but we can understand what that challenge was, how difficult that was. On the other hand, we can appreciate the fact that there's something special about everybody coming together in one place. And there's such a contribution to unity, not just political unity, but spiritual unity. And I assume that is what God wants to accomplish by saying, no, you want to sacrifice. And it could also be a desire, this is just my own theory, a desire to wean away from the sacrifice. God says, you would think I need sacrifices? No, he gave commandments on sacrifices, but there's an approach that says the sacrifices were to help the nation of Israel, because this was how they related to serving God. That was so, prevalent in the ancient world. But it could be that what God is saying is, you can still talk to me when you're in the Golan Heights, when you're in Tiberias, when you're in Beersheba, you can talk to me. You don't have to bring the sacrifice. The sacrifice is something special. It's for a holiday. It's for a special occasion, a special whatever. Then yes, you come and bring the sacrifice. But don't think that I'm not there listening to you. When you pray to me in your backyard, you don't need to bring a sacrifice in order to talk to me. And that could also be part of this temple thing, getting rid of the high places. But that's just my way of looking at it. All right. Anyway, so have a good day, everybody. And please God, we will meet again next week and take up with verse 3 in chapter 3.